In the Darkness I See, by Anon Y. Chapter 5. Pride. You used the word realer, I said abruptly. You shouldn't have. The comparative form of real is more real, not realer. You did too, replied Tommy, in an almost non-voice. Before me, in fact. Wait, no I didn't. Except in the... How do you... My trance suddenly broke, and I realized that I was writing over and over two little lines. The first rough reading: why would the self, billions and billions of selves, be the important part of becoming? Think. And the second double scratch scribble, even more barely reading: one must ask why love action is actually the highest human virtue, what the word actually translates from truth unfathomable into crystalline tears. Acts of love as instantiations of existential ordering truth into this reality. Between lethal lymphocytes and lambent love. On one of our off days, Tommy reached out to me over the phone. It had seemed that he had called from nowhere. It was sudden but remarkable. As unmemorable as the beginning of the call was, we quickly began discussing the larger background of Tommy's pained existence. I never wanted to partake in any discourse that day. That was the way with Tommy. Everything always happened before I could contest. I answered the phone, and without context, he suddenly began speaking. "Why am I really here?" he simply asked. It was early morning, and I was feeling rather prophetic. So, instead of directly answering his prodigiously destructive question, I thought it best to make him think. "Your life needs no explanation in order to be fulfilling," I defiantly proclaimed, smiling as Tommy waited silently. "Let me speak in riddles for a moment," I continued. "Though the boisterous bull remains ignorant in his life, he very well may remain happy for most of it, satiated with the indulgences of life. The scrupulous swan, nourished with knowledge of the world and his place within it, unsatiated and endocrinologically empty, finds little true joy in the simple pleasures of his life. Unskilled and clumsy, the bull remains in the foggiest fascination with his world. The swan, exuding elegance and neural sophistication, spends his time thoughtfully and pragmatically dreading his life. The bull only truly falls in the presence of unsolvable problems. Confronted with an immovable obstacle, the bull will break himself in his barrage upon the object. This barrier, around which the swan easily navigates, is timely and costly for the bull to dismantle. The bull remains trapped in the incoherently formed fantasy. Betrayal of his morality or conception of others usually levels this poor creature. The bull's virtuous path is usually found when others remove the barricade and help him along the path. The swan, baseline stuck in the clarity of the world's truth, finds little solace in the bull's pastimes. His time is far better spent understanding why he is here. The mere thought of battling the bull evokes nothing but a prediction of futile failure and lost time. Instead, the swan understands his place in the world, and accepts the mind and soul with which he was blessed. The downfall of the swan is when his objectivity betrays him. The swan attempts to swallow his pride, to analyze his past and plot his future, but cannot. Within this timid time, the death of the swan, he will discover the unproductive and lackluster life that his past proposes. The swan then blames the emptiness of life for his sorrow, even though he had previously declared it to be vicariously vital in allowing for interpretation of the universe. Hyperconscious ponderances strangle the swan. Both the bull and the swan understand nothing by way of their true purpose, but remain subject to reality. Both unjustified or justified, true or false, these two beasts only seek purpose within their purposelessness. The true winner is an abstract chimera of these two animals. The swan's studiousness, paired with the bull's booming, allows for no tangible impediment to stand tall enough to be deemed immovable. Overaction due to an empty mind is as detrimental as inaction resulting from an indulgently pensive mind. Tommy, for too long you have been skillfully skulking in the shadows of your own pride. You must confront your fears forthrightly and fully. The path ahead is filled with potent anguish. The destruction of your defensive pride must begin. You cannot swim solemnly in Swan City any longer. The bull within you must be bolstered. Do as you wish to be. Hesitating, Tommy remained quiet for another long moment, almost charging up his impactful response, surely ripening as a critique of my clear and clearly accidental, by way non-mastery, metaphorization of the already thoroughly discussed non-artist and artist dichotomy. The cherry atop teetering being the fact that my few included summarizing words meant so much more than my rambling in between. Instead of offering an onslaught, Tommy infirmly asked, "Why must growth be so jarring, and what is so powerful about the bull?" I responded quickly, adding, "For each embodiment of these spirits, their downfall is the refusal of an alternate path forward. Your pride has blinded you to the prosperity of the other path, disallowing for dynamic growth. This subtle stagnation, found by you in the less comfortable and lesser understood life, has allowed in you a refusal to construct a multifaceted reinforcement against human suffering. This lost opportunity for a robust and experiential life increases your inadequacy as you travel further down this pathway. Hence, at this point in your young adulthood, you should break free from solemnity and follow at least some paths of the alternate route, whilst your mental malleability allows for it. I let silence carry the weight of my message for a beat or two. A man's pride, I continued, will take everything from him. It will refute the truth in even the most thoughtful of men. This is his true darkness. The truth of the world bears little significance in comparison to identity. The question itself, why am I really here, is filled with unidirectional focus on self, and then abstracted into meanings of the world and ideas of gloom. This is bottom-up thinking as opposed to top-down acceptance and translation. Your life is not about yourself. It is about your place within the truth and the glory of its light, instantiated by proxy as the judgments of other people attempting to do the same. Perhaps then, now, you see the truest reasoning for your intensifying retreat. Adding to my contemplation, filled with his seemingly masochistic consternation, he spoke, retorting, "Yes, this is what I have been thinking. As we move into older and older reproductive strategies, we are left alone and isolated, only thoughtfulness attempting to ail our idle minds. It's this introspection, unproductive usually, that leads to so much suffering. The number of times I have said I and me is ridiculous. We are engineered as socially oriented individuals. Like the most unveracious and vicious spiral, I have been dragged further and further into nihilistic negativity, separating more and more from my community. The repetition of this downtrend has ended me." With my entire being refuting Tommy's drastic overindulgence in shame, I felt a deep impulse to remind him of his humanity and hope. "You are not done, you are just beginning," I reaffirmed. "You could perhaps be using this fascination with your end as a distraction or excuse for your lack of productivity. Do not allow this to happen. That will actually end you. Nihilism is too pervasive to use as an excuse, for this false nihilism will absorb you just the same as the truly experienced emptiness it becomes, impossible as that is. Becomes. Hence there is only false nihilism. But I digress. The most important thing for you to do is to pack your pride away and earnestly solve the problems by which you claim not to be troubled. It will be the turning point of your life. Even with all your obvious achievements shining, you have been misled by your cumbersome and protective pride into believing that all you have done has allowed for more distance from others. But no, it has been your deepest knowing all along that your pride is the buffer that protects the truth, that you simply want to prove yourself worthy as a part of all not so apart from home, love, experienced oneness, and acceptance by the others you feel surely should hate you, as you pretend to hate them. It is this protective pride that has destroyed your virtuous movement. The shame that has been covered up by this malformed version of pride allows for total control over the objective goodness in your heart. So the question is not, why am I really here? Rather, it becomes, why do I hide from myself as seen in others' truth seen in me? And why am I so full of not being worthy of the love for which I seek proof? You answer these questions, and you might just become free. Either wanting to be prideful or accepted, or knowing that one is truer, Tommy quickly replied, it still shows me not how we are more than separate selves wanting different things and abstracting out, as you have said, and refuted only by opposite idea, top-down translating as you craftily constructed. This is the problem of echoing dogma, I replied, of thinking that God and Satan are apart from us, as aidful as the truth translation was initially. If we understand ourselves as pieces of the love nucleating in all experiential domains, space and time fruiting in all of us at every level, then you see that this idea of more than self and God and ordering are reductions of the actual miracle that is your every moment. Or perhaps you thought I was going to say, have faith. Frustrated by the stifling of his misconception, Tommy hung up the phone, and I wished that I could have said what I did, or even know now what has been written. I couldn't and do not. Though he had attempted to expel his words with indifference, I had heard the most gorgeous spark of excitement in his voice throughout our call. It was becoming clearer with whom I was speaking. He was a crusted over and toughened outer shell of a young man. Who he actually was, though, to his predictable chagrin, poked through him like a saber in fruit. So hurt and despairing, Tommy's heart couldn't yet allow for full vulnerability. He needed to expel that hard exterior. Like any detonation, propelling the shrapnel of its outer casing into all, his movement from maleficence was to be explosive. With my intellectual shield fastened, I was ready for the removal of his pervasive pride. I was so unbelievably excited for him. We knew that it was the only option. Leaping to my feet, I danced alone, surprised by his guided revolution. Soon after, I saw Tommy once again outside of the framework of our session's regularity. One afternoon, while I sat alone studying, he knocked on my door. Still happy with his reignited hope, I let him in. He knew that there was no need to beg for a moment of my time. There was an immediate and confusing uneasiness between us as our greetings faded into reminiscence. After thinking for a moment, I realized that our combined discomfort was palpable only because neither of us wanted to admit the brilliance of the call he had made, maintaining our blissful avoidance of the phone call, pretending it was a triviality. He began a new sequence of actions, dissimilar to his usual Pavlovian pattern. He began pacing back and forth through my office. His long limbs gracefully lingered with an almost frenetic consistency. My heart pounded from the power and swagger he exuded. It took him a while to settle. Again, Tommy's internal Mustang, running through the unfamiliar framing of his new corral, bounded through my heart and mind. I sat patiently while my overwhelming cognizance of his struggle saturated me. Unsteady and unsure of his place, Tommy had no more options. No excuse remained for the desertion of his potential. His urgency for abscondence cried out from his darting eyes, but he remained. I was the first to verbal communication, starting off our discourse in a rather pyrogenic manner. "Isn't it tough to deal with suicidality?" I retorted against his desire for silence as stillness, "when you can no longer dilute yourself into believing that your will to power isn't being infringed upon by anyone other than yourself?" The corresponding look on his face was intensely dynamic, shifting from aggravated to infuriated and then to frustrated admittance. I was interested and entertained by his caged mind. There was to be no more sad scarpering for the trapped Tommy. We stared seriously at one another for a quiet moment, and then started faintly laughing. I understood and appreciated the trouble that he had made for himself, and he acknowledged that I was fit to assimilate to the travesty of his adolescence. It was clear, mostly from my sternly unwavering refusal of his fallacious frenzies, that intense strife in early adulthood was a shared experience. There was little malice left between us. He and I both began to accept our new reality, uncomfortably easy as it was to be vulnerable. After the all but tranquil agreeance had passed and he slowly seated himself, just before he made his newest strange comment, there was the moment for which any who knows more than his breakfast, bath, and bed awaits in a relationship. With the gears tumultuously ticking within my timepiece, the condensation drearily dripping down my dewy drink, and as pleasantly and as beside me as ever, the bulb languidly lighting the lofty lampshade, a warm moment of shared shining acceptance met us as an angel upon mites. I am not yet sure if philosophical pragmatism is the most effective modality through which to live a life, said Tommy, breaking the quiet. It always seems to guide me to the most depraved parts of us. The most simplistic and animalistic logic dwelling in our brainstem consistently fabricates our decisions. I can no longer just accept this. After all, how can anything I theorize or believe, if derived from my own over-evolved primate brain, be veracious? It's just another Ouroboros. I'm tired of hating myself. Once again correcting his misguided self-loathing, I jumped in, saying, "When you abandon the metaphysical for a moment and think practically, only atomized assimilation exists through time. From this presumption, our desires are neither good nor bad. They are either malformed or socially aligned self-service. From the most sadistic murderer to the lovely lady he victimizes, they both act on behalf of themselves, modulating between their supposed goodness and evil. If you feel bad about what drives you, you must hate all others, for they are also inescapably influenced, and usually totally occupied, by their self-service. They may not be interested in unwinding their reality, but they are undeniably driven by the same internal systems. Their diffidence or defiance, their temptation towards the negative symptomologies based on their past, their choices, these are the things that we must analyze. Intentions matter, but actions override thoughts. We are all lost, but must find a way through ourselves. Free yourself of this intense guilt. It is driven by your misapprehension and uneven administration of judgment. In my attempt to reconfigure Tommy's mind into an accepting of reality machine, another wave of liberating constriction tightened around his protective constitution. Resiliently, he rose and started again pacing. It was clearly too much of a change for his mind to be lovingly cleared of guilt. He had been so built up for so long, lost in his introspective anguish, that he couldn't find release. There was no counter-argument left, no distance from his beautifully wicked mind. With a small amount of guidance, he could have virtuously built such a palace of true pride, but instead a crushing boil had formed over him. The thought of it brought me half to tears. Tommy's lost greatness still eluded him. I wanted to help him more than ever. With my eyes growing red, I whispered to him, "You don't have to prove anything to me, my boy. You are wonderful, not perfect, but wonderful. You have the brightest light, filled with the grandest impetus to be better. This is all a man truly needs." It was like speaking to myself, needing assurance in my goodness after losing myself in my faults. It took time to settle Tommy down, to read through his problems as clearly as possible. I assured him that he was safe, reaching out and gesturing for him to calmly sit. It is too often that we find ourselves in a cycle of problematic revelations, I added. These paradigm shifts often turn inwardly and cause more harm than resolution. This reductive lens through which you have peered for some time now has left you with no one to blame but yourself. While this methodology allows for growth when used clearly and logically, it is too easily overdrawn. You have applied scrutiny to your soul instead of the cancerous and pervasive protective capabilities of your mind. Enraptured awe will follow those who love themselves enough to view themselves clearly. You have been too smart for too long, ferocious but misguided. He smiled and agreed with my summation. It was as though he could finally release some internal dialogue into the universe. His emancipation granted freedom to a smile, the physical representation of the untying of his thoughts from his identity. He finally found protection from his hindered heart. His eyes danced celebratorily. He sat once again and leaned back into the couch. Like a newborn being baptized, his writhing body was taken by the blessed sanctity of deliverance, easing him into muted steadiness. I smiled for him and said, "It is an honor to understand you." He smiled back at me and gleefully joked, "Give it a minute." We laughed together again and then returned to unvocalized peace. I had found my route forward with him. I had to justify his trust in me. I had to allow him to gently reveal his secrets only within the echoes of my chambers. He had not trusted anyone for a long while. That was abundantly clear. His faith had been taken. Perhaps it had never been formulated. It was going to take much more time and familiarity to lose the layers that remained between us. Cautious and careful, Tommy remained pensive. I meant no harm, and he was coming to terms with it. I only served to amend his oblique righteousness through opposition, stern but forthright. Suddenly, slicing through the calm, a thought of unimaginably inconsiderate chemistry dashed into my brain. I immediately mishandled my newly adorned trustworthiness by nodding at him. I wanted to see his capability to read social cues, testing his level of introverted temperament and possibly probing for autism. His unresponsive look concerned me. Unable to ruminate and react simultaneously, maybe, I wondered. He took a moment and responded, querying, "Why did you just nod at me?" Immediately regretting my indirect accusation, I said, "I wondered if you had ventured into another realm of thought. I am interested in the level of your thought's unidirectionality, especially when you are possessed by the focused achievement of freedom from yourself." Intensely apologetic as I remained, I inaudibly gulped, my mind too set on permuting the possible causes for my id's ineffable, intrigue-driven act-out against his iconoclastic intellect to focus on trivial physical happenings. He stared at me almost vicariously. I had gotten too comfortable, leading myself to believe that I needed not to do my job, but rather explore the mental scape of a most absurd outlier. I had treated him as an interesting friend rather than a client. Taking my answers seriously, Tommy looked up while he thought. His eyes enlarged from the enormity of his excitement. He peered up into the intricacies of the gypsum above him. I viscerally felt his analysis of the contradiction between my inconsiderate action and my pithy explanation. While he perused the ceiling, I continued to think. My mind quite quickly shifted back from my selfishness. Before I could regret my actions fully, he responded to my claim. "While usually my focus is infinitely intense," Tommy explained, "and thus overwhelming, I see great value in it. I am seldom distracted from my focus. I think this is a reality for only a few people." He grinned an avaricious grin. "In this I take great solace." Relieved by his incorrect analysis of my rude gesture and fraudulent rationalization, I smiled and agreed with the virtue he had discovered. While the guilt of my actions would ride over me for many ensuing days, I took comfort in the idea that Tommy could be so cognizant of his strengths, even with an accusation against his mind's positive more than normalcy lingering. Though his claim was seemingly prejudiced, It had clearly originated from an honest and almost modest place. I knew that to be true. I found myself proud of him once again. That prideful acknowledgment paired beautifully with my shame. After a great pause, we switched our focus from him and back to a broader topic. He incentivized the switch by filling the room with confused anger or passion, hesitating for a moment before announcing his grand idea. "The good and the evil, the strong and the weak," he suddenly said. I was rather taken by the drastic shift, that obscure objection, and so I asked for a more definitive depiction of his meaning. With no secondary temporizing, Tommy added, "We are so focused on the impact of our biological systems that we forget to notice the truth of this world. I hold no ambivalence towards reality. The universe feels not for our quandaries nor passions. It is indifferent to our terrors and upheavals. The structure of good and evil is a modulating spectrum placed forth by a free society. More importantly, a society at peace. Mostly at peace, anyhow. This adaptive metric, though changing because of our sociological adaptation and evolution, is rather immobile. Along this moral landscape lies all men, from the sadistic psychopath to the innocent martyr. Each of these men are characterized by their action within this region of moral action as strong or weak. Thus, there are 4 maximal cases through which each man exerts his power. Oh, that consistent connection between us. The 4 extremes are as follows: strong and good men, weak but good men, strong but evil men, and lastly, weak and evil men. Like a simple graph with 2 axes, men find themselves always at some point within these 4 bounds. I felt an urgency within his announcement. For clarification, I asked, "Why is this idea so important to you, with all the sweated effort put in by you to depict it with such clear imagery?" He looked at me with pressurized gloominess, the pain unbearable. It was like he had been gifted an enormous but good rock that he was incapable of carrying. "I am attempting to rationalize the world," he explained. "Most of my perceptions, especially of one specifically inconceivable intake, have always been too much for me. I am most troubled as of late because of a documentary I watched on child pornography, and the rapid increase of its usage in recent years. Though I had thought I was equipped to encounter such darkness, my forthright rationality fell into peril at the mere sight of all these statistics and ideas and people, and my apathy quickly shriveled, taking the brunt of my frigid fright. The sensitive examination of the material was too much to remain unemotionally even-keeled. I have sat troubled for weeks now. I have tirelessly been trying to explain it all and rationalize the situation to perhaps outline a solution. As you would say, my lens has been fractured. Fully enthralled with his response to such vile regions of the human psyche, I implored, "What more have you come up with?" "Pivoting back to the axes I brought to light," he continued, "we can analyze the placement of every man on each axis through understanding that there are a series of interactions with the world. Each interaction with the greater reality to which we are exposed either incentivizes or deters us from continued pathways. Referentially unbalanced cause and effect exponentialities cause pooling at the corners. This gathering of men at the 4 corners is due to a repetitive positive or negative action loop. As facile as it is for the strong and good man to enact positivity and reap the rewards to further motivate the next action, both cases of the weak and evil men and strong but evil men can use this same pattern to embolden their depraved, sadistic, and hateful sentiment, embodied by their evil action, to drive them forward, each action bringing them further from the good. One toe dipped in and reasonably unharmed calls for a waist-deep inspection, followed by a dive. All this processing occurs at a level beneath malleable morality. It is from within their primordial drive for exertion of their presence. They would rather be evil and here than not here at all. To be known for their evil is even better for them, more exertion of their fight against goodness. Wanting resolution to the lack of real-world utility that was seemingly apparent in his explanation, I probed, asking, "So, how does all this help to solve any issues?" "Sexual misconduct," he quickly responded, "unto a child is the highest form of power these men can muster. Pure innocent weakness is overridden by evil strength, hence the satiation of their will to power." Removing our empathetic minds for a moment and shifting our focus to the logical progression of things, we can convert the perversion into a productive discussion. By understanding that people are guided by society through incentivized action and control loops, we can use this to realize that the evil that lurks in the shadows is a symptomology of a sick system. With the increasing movement away from the bolstering of the strength of men, caused by the conflation of the strong and good men with the strong but evil men, we have waged war against the founding principles that have governed men's understanding of strength from their inception. The erosion of the key tenets of masculinity has been enacted with much haste and in the guise of liberation from a falsely labeled system. The historically impaired Western system has been deemed a tyrannical patriarchy, as opposed to its true name, an imperfect meritocracy. As a result, the difference between good and evil has become blurred because the will to power has no socially acceptable pursuit. So, it is left to fester in the underbelly of the system. Thus, in order to overcome the societal annihilation of their power, men are forced to become unaffected by the constructs built around them, leading to the revitalization of their power, but only fashioned for evil action. With this theorization, we have a working pathway to ease the pain of these so-called evil men. We need to recreate a system where the incentive is placed on the strength of men to manifest in the realm of good. With this lofty pursuit to correct for mislabeling in mind, one must take individual action first. I'm sure you tell all your male clients this, and I guess I'm no different. Tommy pouted for a second. A man's pursuits, if they do not impeach other people's rights, are what truly make him a man at all. Agreeing with his pragmatic approach, I thought for a moment and then added, "This is a wonderfully considerate lens through which to view the evil of man." He quickly corrected my misconception, shouting, "I feel nothing but hatred for those evil men. There is no virtue or value to derive from their being. Only their anti-being will do. I have no compassion, only blind fury. I simply understand that these men are synthesized by the world, so it doesn't help anyone to try and solve problems by treating the effects. My anger remains, but the understanding of it all, and my desperation for a solution, supersedes my need for vengeance. For, technically, with all the claims of self as all and all for selves, there is no real harm outside of differentials of emotions and imbalances of power here. The postmodern perfect paradise. True, it is that technically this is not out of alignment with the chaos that we have cultivated by way our lost way. The order of being has to have a truth to it, so that the victims and victimizers actually have a system of crystallizable understanding that there is more than their trauma-induced proven hollow self. Fill thought onlyable with animalistic escape into temperament-guided misdoings. Fuck yous to the strange feelings of moreness they resent absolutely, but cannot understand as absolute. We cannot fight a lack of proof of this moreness, translated by us by insisting on the idea that the previous, much faltered, antiquated translation is useful to selves once again. No, it is not sellable outside of a translation of actual truth totale that the self should be in service of the more. The translation of the more could never be repackaged and repurposed into some sloppy and patchy proof of the more being in service of the self. That would be an inversion. It has to be a new and improved existential ordering in order to prove firstly at all that it was ever an actual translation of truth and not just synchronized dogma. and secondarily to show that the potency of any translational text is only to increase with a deeper understanding of the truth. You see, this is where Jung fails. Jung and his practical point of focus as self. Symbols don't move internally from external, but rather translations of truth change. This is entirely different. These symbols are not just abstract tools made of tight air to delude ourselves into believing. Rather, they are reductions of grand, perfect oneness within which the selves in between levels of consciousness may act and hope and be. There cannot be truth to true more than self-service as our highest virtue reflecting the actual fabric of conscious dynamics if the self is the focal total point. Jung, tools over truth. But I once heard Jung say that he knows God exists, and so perhaps my comprehension is lacking. Blood, sun, ballooning, blood, sun, thudding. Understanding Tommy's limits, I shifted from the topic after granting him reinforcement for his positive enactment of his own will to power, forcefully responding, "Well, I think your pragmatic perception is great." He quipped back, responding, "Yeah, I bet. Let's talk about this country. Oh, this land of freedom, with all its crony capitalism. It is no longer tainted towards, but rather is becoming, a corrupt tyranny. We sit on and take one injustice after another in the hopes that we will eventually find the bottom of this system's debauchery. This shift towards the dissipation of our sovereignty has all been so disgustingly disguised as goodness, our leaders greasily glowing from their own greed." He rolled his eyes, almost hurt personally by the unoriginality of his own idea. We no longer live for enriching experiences or movement forward. With our feet firmly fastened in the most fastidious quicksand, we are dragged into our designated futility. Like roaches, we feed, fuck, and fall to death, never truly living. I am tired of all this. I live for the persona I have created. This enigmatic master of minds, manipulative and distinguished. Layered in lingering lust, Lucifer, lovely and languid as he is, grasps lividly at the reins of the Leviathan he has created within me. I feel like a bottled cannon. With fragile glass broken, bottomless rage will be unleashed. I am not alone. I sit with all my others. Parched, we feast, longing for uneasy action. The good in us has been adjudged and condemned. There is no pride in a man's prosperity anymore. This is the system that will envelop itself. No pride? Fine. Welcome evil. I looked upon his enraged demeanor curiously. He was feeling what he had said so begrudgingly, like some possessed impostor, angry at his own revelation. His eyes were coated in the most unwanted fury, his blazing shame and guilt simmering just beneath. It was far more than internal despondency. He felt the world. He structured his understanding and mainlined the sympathy. That truth had proved much too monumental for him to bear. His heart had been corrupted by the most unsavory soot, lost to the evil machinations of the world. Trapped by his own hope for better, disillusionment on tap, Tommy skulked behind the shadows of the window's edge, shifting slowly backwards in his chair. With his sadness turning surly, he softly continued, "I ran across a beautiful snake the other day. Though perhaps a monster to its prey, it was so vulnerable and weak to me, in my shadow. I looked closely at the slithering serpent as it twisted and turned along the hot pavement towards its next meal. It wriggled away slowly, at its top speed, and I watched that faultless part of nature slide towards his fate, or perhaps from it. I felt pity at first, and then the most enormous wave of regret for my initial interpretation slammed into me. The creature that lay in front of me was not pitiful. In fact, it was much more at peace with this world than I could ever wish to be. I was envious. My jaded jealousy took a hold of me. Finally filled with this odd, furious fascination, I picked up the small creature. Its malleable and dexterous skin proved unmanageable, falling out from my grasp quickly each time I attempted picking it up. Somehow it sensed what was to come. Tommy looked up and smirked grimacingly, with a subtle yet direct threat in his eye. I felt my bones quiver with the girth of such a smile. Through gritted teeth, Tommy continued his story, saying, "I whispered to him from above, 'We are all tired of this.'" Tommy loosened his jaw, almost losing his breath to his morose entrancement. "And then I took my heel and drove it down with such unhinged lunacy, stomping until only a paste remained. A paste he was, a paste he became, especially his head, some pulpy pate, so rich with innocence. So perhaps I have spat upon God's creation, or maybe the rules of engagement into which I have been birthed have deemed it so. Either way, we suffer." Clenching onto my seat, with my elevated heart rate looking upwards at my fear, I reacted violently, needing to at least shout at Tommy and chastise him. "I have half a mind to demand you leave my office immediately," I said firmly. "This is no place for the excusal of psychopathy. You, my boy, need to reevaluate your choices. Each erosion of your soul is at the detriment of you. The world suffers secondarily. Always remember that." Bursting into laughter, Tommy corrected himself, retorting, "It was from a web page I had read from on the dark web. I continued my research after the documentary into the sick and twisted creatures of the night, you see. I took it upon myself to observe, with great recitation, the logos enlisted by such heinous characters." "Wow, you thought I would so quickly disclose my indulgence in the darkness if I was a psychopath? Come on, give me some credit here." I stared disparagingly at him. Our first terrifying confrontational disagreement was a facade. I felt a perfectly unbalanced mixture of sickness, anger, and envy building within me. His masterful manipulation was all too perfect. I asked him to leave shortly after, and he agreed with little resistance. It took some time to clear the dark energy that he had brought upon and perfused throughout my space. My heart remained racing for some time, still unsure whether in his anecdote or excuse the truth resided. He returned to me shortly after. 20 minutes or so passed before he poked his head into my office. With a false ease gracing his face, he attempted to mask his gleeful submergence into the most insufferable and sadistic satisfaction with my terror. He quickly recognized my disapproval of his, at best, trivialization of the moment. "Look," he said gently, "I am sorry for bringing up such an awful actuality with little preparation, but please don't conflate my callous coping mechanism with some non-desire for better. The proof that would lead to this world's vindication rests at my feet. It pulls at me, begging for some enrichment of my heart and soul through action. I sit back, though, stuck in all the bad, totally soured to the benevolence all around me. I had no idea that it was so contagious. I meant only to share how it had made me feel. I figured that that was what this is all about." Now looking at me seriously, Tommy awaited my rejection or acceptance of his shining apology, so well crafted. I stared at him once more in silence and accepted his apology, easing the mood with a witty retort. "You are absolved," I loudly announced, with some strange confidence behind my voice. He smiled. I was instantly filled with shame at my fearful reaction to a client. I had breached my professionalism and impartiality once again. I couldn't look at him. I looked down from the young man in the doorway and said, "I am here to listen and be as least judgmental as possible. I will do better. Let's stick to normal sessions. Maybe an ounce of banality would be nice." When I looked up from my statements, I realized that he had left. Just my emptied office remained, still stained by his darkness. I sat frigidly for a while, pondering how much of my disclosure he had heard. After begging for clarity of mind, I came to rationalize what had played out before me. It was a clear case of hyperviolent desensitization. He had something brewing deep within his forebrain, festering. I took a note to guide me back to an understanding of Tommy. Less encumbered by my judgment, my hope in Tommy's sanity filled me once more as I wrote the following. In a strange way, a victim of a violent crime must seek a new mental framework once the original lens has been shattered. Though still silent on the matter, Tommy has experienced life-altering trauma that has brought him to his knees. I know this to be true. Like with any trauma, we can measure its damage by comparing the moment with the baseline perception. Thus, the deformity of Tommy, shining brightly as recreations of his trauma by proxy equivalent similar type reenactments, is more a reflection of the distance from his baseline than the manifestation of evil he encountered. Hence, we can assume that Tommy was enormously innocent when the trauma occurred. Alternately, the trauma could have been extraordinarily awful for a man of any age to encounter. In a case as extreme as Tommy's, both of those assertions may be true. As I meditated on the potentialities of his wounding, I couldn't help but to feel sorry for him and extend out the most paternally desperate empathy. I thought about his misguided undertakings, not only of his movement into the darkest places to seek, but also the framework within which he had been living, constructed so unconsciously. Unable to concentrate through the problem-solving, too laden with sores, he had been building the most putrid perception. I was called so clearly by something to aid in the boy's recovery. The next scheduled session was rather interesting. Tommy came into my office with a rather shaken-up expression on his face. The boy was confused but contemplative, ungracefully sitting down. We were once again deviating from our ingrained procedure. As he gathered his thoughts, his whole body convulsed slightly. It was not an act, but rather a controlled version of a body in protest. Many jolts of uncomfortable energy ran through his body, ravaging his stillness. He slowly returned to a less contorted disposition and shared his troubling news, explaining, "I kept looking through the dark web, and I was surprised to find a site that shared declassified but suppressed government testing videos. I stumbled across some weird experiment that scraped already differentiated cells from an axolotl and left them in a petri dish. These cells intercellularly communicated to establish a small multicellular organism the researchers deemed novel clumps. These clumps immediately understood movement and regulated reproduction through clustering of other loose skin debris. More work on frogs has been undertaken at the university level with the exact same results. It all shows that cells have the inherent qualities that used to be understood as higher-order functional properties, arisen from our complexity, driven by eons of complex multicellular evolution, emphasis on complex. Simple separation from a cell's host and the constraints of other cell types," continued Tommy, "allows for an entirely functional and self-replicating organism to form. While I watched these new life forms rotate around, I was struck by this feeling of total revelation. We are not ourselves. We are connected, cellular, and below. The electrochemical signaling of ourselves means so much more than who we think we are. All the emerging ethics, the lustrous life forms, the wonderful wounds, they are all so trivial to the complexities of our own conglomerated cells. Efficiency of life, this is what we are about." I was very quickly intrigued by Tommy's seemingly misplaced reverence. After some thought, I asked, "Can you please clarify for me the significance of the cell's behavior?" "It is the face of God, don't you see?" he immediately replied. "Of life, or some life force, or energy. We finally found it. A new translation. It is what drives us, what compels us. This, whatever it is, its impetus's concentration is not where I had assumed it to be. It is not humans that are cared for naturally. The games and pursuits of complex beings are unimportant. It is the disruptions of the universe, and the streamlined return to this ambiguous neutrality, the efferent homeostatic tendencies of our expanding universe, where we shall find more and more truth. I have always believed we were one, but I could never pinpoint a viable reasoning. We are all homeostatic beings, modulated by efficiency. Even within us, sickness is disarray of cellular interactions. The cohesiveness of the network, optimized for functionality, both individually and communally human, is the highest ethic. The ethical order of the universe, mainly manifested as a binary good and evil, seems even more multifaceted now, but remains so practically simple. It really is about the point of perception through which one chooses to analyze the world. Like, if you were a cell, why would you think about a human's presence, or its impact, or its importance, or its point of focus? Hence, I guess, why, as Jung says, theology is a psychological endeavor. Amazed by the nuance of Tommy's rant, I applauded his insightful thoughts. Additionally, his sprightly speech, yet to be seen by him, gave way to an inherently optimistic assumption. Though he was incognizant of the importance of that small presupposition and the growth within him that it represented, the girth of his mental shift was stellar. It was an assumption that meaning could emerge from something uncaring or humanly unimportant, such as the dynamic balance of energy within the universe. It was a focus on something more than the self. He had finally solidified a more robust framework through which he could interact with the world. I asked for some time in silence so that thoughtfulness could dominate us. For my use of time, I ventured into the new framing that Tommy had laid out before me. Through his more pragmatic, semi-spiritual outlook, good and evil became less mammalian. Thus, our interaction with such things was far less prone to systematic onslaughts, causing fewer breaks in my identification of objective truth with Tommy. The new objective was tilted towards the farewell of others because of the unification imperative he had expressed. Overall, his view was emboldening the good and lowering the impact of evil against the blockades within his mind. That kind kingdom. He was actively building a new framework of moral understanding from the potently less ignorant shards of his past, just post-something vile witnessed self. Oh, the creative driver named trauma. That proxy proof of the world as unworthy as reflected by the emptiness insisted upon and abstracted out in order to deflect one's true felt powerlessness. Wonderful, I exulted, out loud and internally. He had done so much, become so different, all within the time span most would consider ineffectual. From the deeply draining, almost demonic meeting before to the wonderfully solid and powerfully pro-human discourse meeting anew, Tommy's neural flexibility captured my pride. He was truly a gifted young man. While my prideful thoughts refilled my mind, I earnestly reminded myself of an only growable worse potential realization that the rapid shift of mental understanding could indicate something of a manipulation of either me or himself or us both. Even still, I refused to allow his grandiose image to be dismantled within my mind. I wasn't sure why. As internally critical as I remained, I continued to praise his mental flexibility and originality. He stared pensively at the area just above my head. His heart was still unsteady. It was as if he was stuck between reality and his mind, entranced and captivated by the reality of existence itself, and unsure of his next momentary crisis. He rendered nothing but pain from his confusion, evident in his tormented expression. He was the greatest enigma, with the most insufferably occupied mind residing within, the hope for good pulsating, but the calling for something less simple crying. He continued verbosely. This tissue bundle that formed, he added, it was like watching what I would do if I was free from my restrictions. All I have thought throughout my entire life is that there was some emergent superiority to complexity. These little tissue clumps formed into a new organism and moved through space with such a purpose. The meaning they were able to derive from such an ambiguous environment, it was like they had been programmed by some creator. It's like I'm not living for me. I am a carrier for something greater than myself, individuated on every level, but somehow cohesive. It's hard to express how I'm feeling about it. It's like this. If we hold hands, are we now one? Well, our skin cells are touching. Though separated by a small section of dead dermis, we are combined. Two consciousnesses, but only one body. Okay, now imagine we could surgically combine our bodies, somehow fusing our nerves, musculature, bones, vasculature, etc. Now our circulatory, nervous, muscular, lymphatic, and other systems are combined into one metasystem, sharing hormones, proteins, neurotransmitters, T cells, B cells, digestive enzymes, gametes, and all that. Basically, we become conjoined twins. Are we now less separate? Not really. This is because we share different consciousnesses. Though our mood and neural regulatory systems may have been combined, our consciousnesses will refuse to be aligned. It is this higher order consciousness that seems to dictate the separateness. By all biological accounts and records, we would be one organism, but we remain separate. Only consciousness separates us, dictating from where we may derive distinction. We are one. Also, nothingness cannot exist as it is a fragment of thought from someone that exists. Sorry, I didn't mean to be derivative. Anyway, we all will die, and when we do, our consciousness will dissipate and the liberation of our cells will begin, their individual processes taking a hold, once more, either functionally recycling or dismantling into cellular parts and energy. When does life begin seems now to be the wrong question. Why do we define life through our separative consciousnesses? That's a much better question. While I was happy with his theorization, especially as I had seen it clearly in my Peruvian endeavor, I was truly confused by his primary revelation. In my medical and biological experience, the drive for nutrition, metabolism, reproduction, and many other inherent functions seemed mundane. I questioned his thoughts carefully, saying, I very much appreciate your distance from self here, but I wish for you to continue in philosophical practice and ask why these theories have arisen within you. Remember that consciousness, though compartmentalized by the philosopher, is always the origination point of thought. If you close your eyes and think deeply about the exact feelings in your first encounter with this uncomfortable realization set, you can learn so much about why this has called out to you. With no hesitation, Tommy slammed his eyes shut and drew a deep breath. It took him a while to uncover the girthy emotionality of his experience. The first minute was quiet, Tommy remaining stiff and still. Suddenly, Tommy thrashed to the side and curled up, slowly relaxing after the clenching energy had passed through him. His eyes remained closed, while his corneas darted around under their covers. After some time spent in agonizing thought, Tommy unzipped his eyes and said keenly, You are good. Pleased with his praise, I continued the process of uncovering further insights, asking, Now, carefully craft a precise and concise expression of your thoughts. The cogency of your statement will serve to help delineate, with intense accuracy and precision, why an interaction is either constructive or destructive. Tommy thought for another moment, truly embodying my advice. Another moment passed, and he volleyed two hugely problematic divulgences at me. For one, he said, if a differentiated cell is not a part of me, but rather is an independent organism with its own drives and incentives residing within my restrictions, I feel immediately guilty, I think. Secondarily, the distance between your and my cells is the only significant emergent property that differentiates us, and some, too, undeniable separate level of consciousness. This makes suffering seem so futile. He looked up at me, immediately understanding my face's disapproval. Okay, fine. This makes me feel defeated, trapped, and defeated. Amazed by his thoughtful and truthful expression of ideas, I thanked him and continued thinking. After my time in silent speculation was spent, I responded. What I'm hearing, I surmised, is that your trouble is derived from your acquisition of responsibility. You can no longer dwell in the despairing realm of stagnation. The video was a clear indication of the virtue in enacting your humanity. Now you see yourself as a totally different life form. You owe it to your little cellular soldiers, as they are extensions of everything packed into you, to treat yourself well. This, I think, weighs heavily on you because of your self-destructive tendencies. To address your secondary claim, I empathize with your exasperation with stupendous suffering, seeming only to be behavior in solidarity with stupidity and limitation. With this frustration in mind, one must enact the ethic of unity, represented by the cohesion cellularly below your level of consciousness, and extrapolatable by their being bottom of top universal fractal perfection, and lead others by exemplifying the ethics virtue. Perhaps this is the tip of your deep blue view anew, the why behind why for which you have been searching. Tommy, in response, opened his posture and allowed for his body to take the form of a most wonderfully receptive pose, his face glowing with anticipation. He was vibrating as he responded, "No, I'm not getting off that easy." "It's like individualized linguistic determinism," he obliquely continued. "A clearly conveyed message is a de facto different language to the confused ramblings of average thoughtlessness. I am truly grateful for this insight. I promise to be more complete in my communicative constructions." Though I was glad for Tommy's welcoming reception of my guidance, reading into my incentives correctly, I remained unsure that he had heard my message about his troubled truth. "Did you agree with my analysis of the causes of your discomfort?" I asked. Untouched by annoyance, and coating his speech with the most uncharacteristic joviality, he responded, saying, "I have never agreed with someone more. I am so excited for what we will discover and work through together. It was like you scraped the walls of my unconscious. You and Freud linked arms, prancing through my motives and emotions. It's truly awesome to be a part of this process." I had finally cracked through his internal value system. It really was truth. He was unbothered by the problematic personality traits and modalities of evil that resided within him. With only residual shame seeming to be left, he was facing the blatant truths of his life. He was accepting them and moving forward more and more freely. His moral objectivity, at such a young age, bothered and inspired me. He had no interest in the manipulations of his hearty mind. Additionally, I could tell his favor for me had grown. He was finally seeing the virtue of what we were doing, shown by my unbiased analysis of his situation. With all these things racing in surely both our minds, we shared a close moment, understood in the voiceless gratitude. Tommy broke the silence with an interesting caveat for his earlier distressing divulgence, adding, "I think that we are truly happiest when our bodies, and each of those cells within, are in harmony with their surroundings." My initial interpretation of the clump tissue was so wrong. All the troubling differences between science and ethicality are minimized by the discovery of cellular intelligence. We can now all see what the optimum outcome is. As separated as we seem to be, we should all be living to reduce the pain of existence through unity. Cellular satiation should be the paramount mediator of our interactions. Though seemingly non-human, it is clear now that the communal ethos crafted within each of the various cultures around the world align on a cellular level. If we just listen, malicious and confused manifestations muted, it's all telling us to be one. I can feel the cells in me cheering, all at once. The last sentence of his uproarious celebration sent sparkles of delight up my back. Spinal concordance. It was the most brilliant new perspective that he had taken. The world, so infinitely complex, had been compressed into a clear understanding. By allowing only the cellular correlates to be heightened as the perspective from which to interpret interactions, Tommy had refined his anxious search for meaning into a definitive landscape. My allocation of agreement filled the room. After a period of prolonged praise, I proposed a warning. While this theory offers an ethical underpinning for collective cognition and unification, I explained wearily, abundant suffering is eradicable from the human experience. Life is long, my boy, and your overarching ethic, co-naturally true as it may be, lacks the redemptive authority of its competitors. Though it seems functionally ideal, the truth of the world comes in waves. Your cellular symbolism may cause more moral ambiguity than it alleviates. Rather frustrated, he looked at me eagerly. He wanted so desperately to defend against my disagreement. Surprisingly, though, he took a moment, catching his words before they could escape. He closed his eyes once more. I watched as his analytical analyzers darted again beneath their optic overcoats. I could see his internal dialogue. From the reason for his disapproval of my disagreement to the best possible counter-argument, he searched. Once fully mulled over, his expressive demeanor rewound his annoyance and then seemed to agree with my inspection. With a refreshingly humble tone, Tommy responded, almost whispering, "The frivolity of my claim is clearly depicted by the time it has taken for me to come forth with it. Additionally, the theory, even the complete one, into which it may evolve, began as a rationalization of an emotion, roughly approximating my feelings. When placed against serious trauma or other human experiences, using only examples aligning with reality, more probable than possible, it becomes clear the lack of scaffolding that this idea creates. The moral disordering of a dehumanizing ethic may seem harmless, but it allows for the withering of our sovereignty. The secular strong-arming of our psychology would strike surreptitiously once again, ardent and agile. Such a progression of thought perhaps suggests that the sorrowful Soviet sickness was less so sought after than stumbled into." I looked upon Tommy's symmetrical face, clean and uncompromising. He spared no harsh truth for any man, no euphemism used, no matter who. Even when condemning his own work, voluntarily, his forthright commitment to truth surpassed virtuous valor. It was robotic rigidity. As dependable and unvarying as Tommy's mind was, his soul was taking the brunt of the repeated realizations, decompartmentalizations, and rebuilds. It was so clear to me in that moment how actually he hated hearing I agree. His heart hung hazily before him, homeless and hungry, hoping that his hurt was healable. He was so close to something truly great. We both knew it. I gave no counter to his thoughtful inquisition within his own theory. I only thanked him for his honesty. As the time passed and he realized the full complexity of his thoughts, he began panicking. It began as a rapid, shallow breath. As he kept thinking, the respiration continued to ravish his whole body, calling upon his hands to begin fidgeting furiously. Totally engulfing him, the panic traveled to his legs, and he jumped up to pace. After striding through my office for some time, finally erupting, his presiding parlous panic took a hold of his voice. He abruptly agitated the last calming component of his environment, the quiet. As a testament to his pain, he knocked hard against his chest. "It's so dark in here," shouted Tommy, thumping across his ribcage. "It's so dark in here." A frightful pause followed, his voice quieting into a defeated whisper. "It's so dark." Troubled by his telling torment, I asked nothing of him. I sat in acceptance of his travel through affliction. Once the urgency of his anger had subsided, he sat, and I reminded him to calmly breathe and dissociate himself from how he felt. He agreed. Steadfast and ready to test his truth once more, he drew down his seeing sheaths, and his vision vessels danced beneath their cowlings. Opening those eyes as slowly as ever, Tommy whispered, It's like I'm one big distraction away from happiness, and then it's over. Each time it's over, it's the end of the momentary mindlessness away from misery. I read about people with similar minds in an article on addiction. I don't have a tangible addiction, but each of my own stimuli is like that for me. It's like these little mini escapes. Luckily, I am hyper-focused on goals, and my addictive tendencies are tunneled through productive avenues. Without these, I am as lost as any substance-abusing addict. This emptiness, like some controlled chaos, it's eating me. I can't even assimilate into nature. I don't know what to do. I responded quickly, softly saying, Often these feelings of emptiness are symptoms of an unoptimized life. The dependency on stimulation in the short term relies heavily on the malnourished long-term endurance of the mind and soul, fed only by monumental achievements proportional to the perpetrator's call for more. However, still, What you do cannot be why you think yourself worthy of affection or intimacy or breath or... You get the idea. Your search for a bigger and better temporary high tells me that you need enormity in your life. Something that compels you naturally, that fills the micro gaps with one big swipe. It should draw you in, wrap you in uncomfortable purpose, pushing you where you thought impossible. Where there is emptiness, there is space for greatness. When you find it, and you will, it will be the story of your life. Remember that you are, using your own biofocal point, the same ball of cells that will eventually be at the end of their happenings, with all that proven greatness ripe. All the need for constant avoidance will fade. There will be nothing to avoid, no cavernous discontent to overtly plaster over with pride. I hope only that your purpose finds you quickly and kindly. Tommy was pushed further into the couch by my statement. It was too true for him, immovable as his static mind still was. He sat for a while and stared blankly up, eventually reaching acceptance. He thanked me for everything and quickly shuffled out of my office. I was happy with his movements. Though he had ended the meeting early once again, I could tell he had left drained, totally emptied of his day's mound of misguided self-loathing, needing a recharge. That day continued to build an interest for me after his evacuation from my office. I decided well after the meeting to go eat out at my local diner, aptly named Home Sweet Home. I was craving a specialty cheese melt and tomato soup. Shortly after being seated in the establishment, I was kindly greeted by Grace Schultz, my regular server. She assured me that I had been missed. I was asking if my special sandwich was still on the menu when I heard the familiar slam of the cowbell against the front door. I quickly shifted my eyes over and saw her, an old client. The first thing I noticed about Lainey Midas was the weight she had lost. She had slimmed down handsomely. I recalled all the meetings where she had assured me that she would end her life. An overweight bulimic, her mother had found her curled up underneath the toilet, howling for death to take her. Too many nights before she brought her to me. After her mother's despair had finally called for action in Lainey's heart, we began to heal her. She had remained rather desperate while in therapy, losing hope, leaving, and then returning multiple times over the course of the therapy. She was so addicted to food, but felt too ashamed, too misunderstood to normalize her eating. On some nights, when she took the plunge into disgust, she would almost revel in her grotesque behavior, recalling those nights as sweetly destructive. Digit-driven discharge was her disorder, and she loved it. Eventually, after months of therapy, she tried to end it all, opening her arm to drain her dysfunction. After almost dying, she was pushed into more intense therapy. A strange young lady, she begrudgingly met with her trauma and moved through the disorder bravely, her approximated end giving her strength. In the session after her attempted suicide, she had told me, "I have been so lost for so long that I cannot see myself without my dread. Eventually, you realize that you'll never really enjoy life. It'll never be something sweet like advertised in those damn magazines. No, it's something to endure, something to get through, a mountain to climb. I guess I can only blame myself now, and that's what I wanted. Something finally in my control. I refuse to let this cruel world take more from me, more of me. I thought that my death would free me, and it has only brought me glory. I know now that it's all in my control, my life and my death. It's all mine." We had proceeded to dance a flagrant dance for a while as she continued to hold the belief in self-defined reverence, and eventually we settled on the truth that preceded her misapprehension. It had taken many months, but we did set her towards the light. Her entire life had been about the forceful bending of her reality around what she desired, and I had finally explained to her that her hubris was the issue, not the world that she had wished to augment. Devastation via deviation from truth she had received in spades. Once she had embodied the spirit of humility and rewound her undeveloped decision-making compass, she finally found the truth. I could have never imagined how well she would have continued in her bold benevolence. But there she was, alive and well, in that diner, with her family, with her mother. I remembered that she would joke so awkwardly with me, saying, "Well, this is my last day." Or she would say, "I'm still alive." Crazy, isn't it? I never understood her flippant use of suicidal humor. Her life was so precious, and she was so cared for. Her resolve to solve her mental disorder was inconsistent but strong when necessary, opposing her morbid joking. By the end of her therapy, she had come to terms with much of her problematic past, and we set a solid framework for growth. Addiction hadn't been the problem, it had been a symptom. She clearly remained true to her aspirations. While she sat with her small family, through the reminiscing, I watched as she laughed. Her high-pitched and meager voice had converted into a booming and compelling pronouncement propellant, free and loud. Becoming probably obviously creep-seeming, I continued to stare as she moved through the compulsions of her desire. With tasty meals swirling all around her, over and over, her troubled face glared in desperation. Then she lowered her sight, spoke to herself, and finally breathed in deeply. I hoped that she was repeating the mantra I had asked her to create. She had needed a system to allow for the breaking of the fixations when they arose. She and I made the custom phrase, "It's only food, and I'm only human, but there's more in me than I know." As I now definitely became unpleasantly fixated upon her in that diner, I remembered her hard laugh as we finally had agreed upon a mantra. She had felt so uncontrollable, so lost in her addiction, and the chant was so compellingly simple. It was an antithetical metaphor for all her life. She remained overjoyed for almost the entirety of her meal. It looked rather bland, scrambled egg whites and whole grain toast. An unpalatable side of pickled onions, piled painfully high, also adorned her plain plate. As she peered upon her provisions, she pouted slightly. "Too much food," I overheard her jokingly say. Laughter echoed once more from the table. As the laughter faded, though, I looked at her face. A mournful expression arose. She was reminded once more of her journey. It lay heavily upon her. Unwelcome, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, and I began to tear up. The deep, hollow warmth of sadness took me from my meal. I remembered how close she had come so many times, and how distraught her mother had been. My empathy extended to all the members of that meal, all in disarray, their problems unimaginably solvable. The love and laughs, resurrected by hard work, was lost on none of them. As the world's truth bared down upon me, she ate the meal, and they all left. On her way out, our eyes met, locking for just long enough to unquestionably recognize one another. Both her and I, in that glance, agreed to remain in our pretend anonymity. That moment, untouched by bothersome banter, embraced us. I was reminded of the impact of my work, and the fulfillment in which I bathed almost constantly. The sight of her and the affixed reminiscing evoked in me a greater urgency for solving the world's problems, one by one. Tommy's first. Her problems were some of the infinitely many issues that grasped all people and extracted their essence. The banality of the world's ailments made me chuckle. I dimly sat, eating my special spread, lost in worried contemplation. Once my gloom had become too tiresome, I left, and on my way out, I looked back at the table at which I had been sitting, and I saw Tommy there, being seated, talking with his mother. I was walking rather slowly, but even that pace proved to be too much a hindrance to allow for focused analysis. I stopped and looked again at the table. It wasn't Tommy at all. It was just another young man, with little care for the world's judgment of his loud bravado. The young man jousted and laughed with his mother. Once I was sure it was not Tommy, I walked out and returned to my home, Blue. I decided there, recovering in my house, that I would help Tommy no matter the personal cost. My old client in that diner, alive and well, had reminded me of my place. It had all hurt me very much, the ups and downs of her dynamic healing. She had, before Tommy, been my most treacherous client, but her laughter in that diner had washed it all away. A similar exchange on some obscure fine day was going to be more potent with Tommy. He was a proud young man, with much to learn. I made a point of pride as sin in the next meeting with Tommy, urging him to rid himself of such an overwhelming cancer. I welcomed him warmly back into my office and smiled at the realization that the regularity of our meetings had finally reached a static level of habitual consistency. It was simple and efficient, the system we had finally refined. He greeted me with a small pleasantry. I returned with something open and unthreatening. He sat, and the battle commenced. After the newest pattern had been enacted, I asked, spreading and covering all insecurities, submerging them beneath layers of concentrated coping, the wonders of the world dull against the unreflective stone wall that surrounds this man. He stands boldly in his own way. Who might this be? I made it clear that it was a direct reflection of his attitude by staring directly through his bright and daring eyes. The sin he guessed immediately, yelling, "Pride!" "How are you tainted by this spirit?" I questioned with the same ease. "Or are you at all?" After lengthy introspection, Tommy answered, saying, "This world is made of the strong and the weak. It has been this way since the dawn of time. The privilege of difficult contemplation is an externality, not connected inherently to meaning." I indirectly asked why he would change the topic completely when faced with potential growth, replying, "Though this is true, at least at first glance, it avoids the fundamental acceptance or rejection of your truth." "Give it more than a glance," Tommy retorted, unfazed. "How could I be proud or unproud when I understand the world and myself as we are and not as I want us to be? I'm not exactly contradicting you." Though slightly misinterpreting my definition and assuring me of his non-contra stance, he had called forth a rather cogent negation of my question. There was nothing more to say about pride within the context of that section of its meaning. Lost on him, the other, more viscerally active partition worried me. It worried me as his answer, clear as day, was synthesized by the very part of him I had hypothesized to be the problem. His pride, crafty and swift, had stripped him of objectivity within his interaction with the world on a primary human level, all the while falsely convincing him of his apt perception of reality. Though he was able to accept the dualities of good and evil, with all the manifested indecipherable laws and distinctions tight snugly squeezed into his universal conception, he couldn't accept a personal rejection of his persona. It was as if he had won the ultimate acceptance to a ride, but the required height lingered unlovingly above his head still. He held the knowledge, but it had all come too easily. While his retrieval and application of the tools for understanding life had been thoroughly repeated, he remained untrained in all the interpersonal adaptations required for human growth. His isolation, combined with his overgrown, prideful demeanor, had left him barren of visionary objectivity when peering into his own mind. I reminded him of the dangers in overcompensating for lack of identity or achievement with abominable pride. Simply summarizing my thoughts, I said, "Inadequacy is the most resolute maleficence maker. Pride may only mask it temporarily." His smirk ran from him with intense cause. He hunched over and attempted to render some clear indictment of my warning. As he approached a clear landing for his counter-argument, I watched as the longing for appeasement of his chinked pride grew stronger. It drew all the energy from his face, leaping from one part of his mind to the next, his eyes jumbled up from their pursuit. He replied, "What would be the difference between pride and self-esteem? Are you insinuating that I have conflated the two? The fine line distinction between net positive and negative lies here, as it does for any spectrum. So where have I faltered, failed, or fallen? Or am I overcomplicating your analysis?" I sensed some sincerity within his counter and continued to explain, saying, "There is no clear difference you are willing to accept between pride and self-esteem because they are too polar in your mind. In truth, there is little overlap between the two. The specified protective pride isolates, and self-esteem lets others in. The former controls and condemns an individual into the cornered existence of an outcast, while the latter allows for growth, faith, and toleration of healthy risk. Note just how much time you have spent dancing around pride and its effects on your life. Think not of self-esteem as has been parodied, but rather as a grouping of ideas that summarize a healthy person's non-emptiness. Tommy quietly laughed and slowly shifted forward, his whole body implicating him in agreement. "Okay," he responded, "so where do we begin to delineate my layers of protective pride?" "It's been a long time, I guess." I looked at his hopeful face and accepted his previous inaction. He was the result of a life unlived, the lost potential of damaged greatness. With my heart steady in matched aspiration, I gave my mind ample time to wrestle with his truth. "There is no official beginning or end," I said proudly, immediately registering my overindulgence and then loosening my seeming grasp on reality. "Simply," I continued, "with continual practice, giving and receiving, you may break open your callous pride. There is no specific training to isolate the pride we so easily discuss. However, we must remember that pride, as an extension and overcoat of insecurity, is only banished where acceptance and love are allowed. Though now identified, the difficult proceeding is the continual checking and validating of the truth within the words you say and the way in which you think. A great question is always, would I condemn another man to my outlook if all I wanted to do was help him, to point the world in a better direction? This always seems to help me in alleviating my temptation towards stagnant false pride. Never allow yourself to fall victim to the persona. Goals are important, but strides cannot be initiated without the admittance of shortfalls. If you don't believe that you're worthy, none of this matters. But if you have faith that at some point you can realize through these enacted actions that you are worthy, then it all falls into place. The intensity of that intellectual onslaught left Tommy speechless. With his thumbs shooting up from his hands, immobilized by his ruminated revolution, it became obvious that his heart and mind were being cleansed. Like a boy who had found his mother, the spirit in his eyes bounded through the room. As he breathed in with acceptance, he reached forward and beckoned in a handshake. I agreed in action, and then we sat in tranquility for some time. No looming defensiveness remained that day. One layer had been peeled back. Tommy seemed lighter, softer, and even sweeter. We knew what we had done, and we shared in an anticipatory energy that loitered for the remaining time. Before our time expired, Tommy expelled one lost sentiment, adding, "I think the problem of distraught dissatisfaction with the world is intensified when the society around you deems one thing to be paramount. Throughout my time here, one pervasive perspective has leached into all facets of life. It is now at the point of being more painful to have a heart than to have nothing. I have been stripped of positive movement forward, deemed a power-hungry boy. Not by society, but by my own experiences and irresponsible reactions. But what is strange is how well I fit in with everybody else. Like some slick 7 of spades in the dealer's dance stack. We men are only a putrid portion of a broken system. Masculinity must be directed, guided. Without proper fostering, one is unable to develop fully in his connection to the whole. Bubbles we all live in, angry, little, red bubbles. The fabric of us is unwinding, man by man." The instability of his mind struck me, the rapid change in discussion too. After thinking for a while in solitude, I came to understand that we were having the repeat same discussion, each only slightly deviated in manifestation talk of the same problem. The boy lacked purpose. I took a note, stating, "Tommy looks to the heavens for a father. He is disappointed. Tommy looks to others for structured praise through achievement. He is stultified. Tommy looks to himself for faith in the future. He remains in disbelief. Tommy looks around at his present. He is dissatisfied. Where does a boy like Tommy go?" What is God but the paternal and maternal love, compounded truth, almost fully unknowable by non-experience? Old Testament and New, is the whole metaphysical world knowable, renewed? I remained curious while rereading some of the previous notes that I had taken. In my review, I understood that the most vehemently avoided issues of Tommy's needed to be resolved first. I then looked at the paper on which he had been doodling. He had assembled a mess of tangled patterns and miniature artworks. The entire page was covered in a complicated order of things, all fighting for dominance. In the scramble, centered perfectly, he had written a message, seemingly to me. My pride, my masquerading shame, it read. It has truly taken everything from me. Addendum via rear. Notes from a future place and time. Bonobo with brain halo horns. False by incomplete, swan and bull. Belligerent back and forth, fomenting. If this life is perpetual, I'm out, suicide out, of this war, at every level, if not actually moreness generating. I think that all religio-philosophical work has been the same point, with different plausible proofs instantiated, and times between or against them. The point through which we are all forced as human beings is that we are separate, but actually, at a most consciously important to us level, one meta thing. I have a feeling that, as with all linear time developments, the next proof is to be most true once again reborn. From the translation, treat others as you wish to be treated, to the truer truth of we are all one, realized, and treat ourselves as such, no matter what, for it is the only thing to do. ADHD is boredom disorder. No innocence without ignorance. The depth of this wish anti-truth is horror. How's this for a cruel joke? Those in love are so inept to explain it in terms of a framework other than symbols and feelings, as if those feelings aren't as predictable as instantiated key and lock metaphysically special, still describable. Those apt enough to explain it feel too unlovable as to feel it properly. No, to feel it felt purely, but less so. Pathetic, but perhaps true abstractions. So much stupid resentment driving me in the avoidance of the problem, my AVPD, and my tries to self-abstract world problems en masse, instead of clearly specific and logically paving forward. But what I have translated by odd necessity just might be the... No matter the truth, looking at my problems now, I was always trying to push blame by rationale, rule in hell and all, and just artificially feel less alone. Also, I think that I have scraped up some limited truth. Cannot solve problems with base of brokenness. Oh yes, one can. Watch. He knew his not true. I knew mine not to be true. Anosognosia. 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 Atoms don't look like that but by translate functional truth. And so it is clear that the full truth of an atom is truer, not fabricated, as too is true with metaphysical translations. Ah, the awfulness of arrogance, of dogma that excludes this idea. Include proof of love, self-dissolution, unity, consciousness, as meaning of all. All morality and fractal humano as this asymptotic self-dissolution, leaning into more consciousness than selves. You okay? Other than whatever it is you're thinking about? Yeah. Like Hiroshima, other than the nuclear bomb is okay. What? Hiroshima? Nothing. Don't worry about it. Hollowness of disorders. Solution as metaphysical restructuring of proxy proofs and understandings of love, truth, realer than self-separateness. Note to Jung. cannot offer a better life than heroin into death if everything is just self. If you think I need to know much about a topic to know basically the deal, then I know you're not smart enough to realize that one thing is all the things. All the things. Crunch, compact, and generalize the meaning of the work of someone. If you don't know what Camus is about, after 10 or so lines, you will never have the faintest idea of what it actually means in an original sense. You will never be original by way first to linear, interpreted, unfolded truth. Intelligence, no, greatness, is not memorized genius, dummy. It's translation of truth, connection, building, etc. All this abstract talk of subjective interpretation, but our discourse here presupposes one truth interpreted at certain levels of consciousness, presumes subjectivity is subsidiary implementation of consciousness. Die instantly, and from my death idea, math will still be. If not for a second between my heartbeats, would it not exist? Like some simulation requiring my vascular PSI persistence? The self-importance of not presupposing one truth and many a-form interpretations of truth, as in both true, absolute everything all more than levels. Yes, if all points to a cat, then it is most likely, functionally, truly, a cat. Anything else is the self-aggrandizement using what if as absolute by presupposed absoluteness of self. But then again, light doesn't know what to do without us viewing it, perceiving it, consciously there to be aware of it. So boring this is. Nietzsche died, and I'm here. If an arch persists because f of x equals negative ax squared, then love is... Why is my universalizing modus down to a cellular level, not up to an etheric sensation? Just how unworthy a cretin requires downwards traversing abstraction to accept more than self-consciousness. Both, as in either illustratable, both true envisionable, work for they show a non-human focal point as infinitely, precisely important. In other words, one direction allows for fractal extrapolation out into either all directions. If a grain of sand is important, then too is the shell it creates or the home that it makes. The ecosystem too, of varied potency keystones, requires the simple sand to stand. The balanced multiplicity of meaning that allows for more than self to be seen. It is an experience away, a revelation stay, to break the rock into geode, within, and everything perfection, total. It's all the same proving of approval of the natural human gift of delocalizable consciousness. This concludes Chapter 5 of In the Darkness I See by Anon Y.